strikes this evening against Iranian-backed groups implicated in last weekend's deadly attack on American forces. The Pentagon confirming 85 targets were hit tonight inside Iraq and Syria, including command and control operations, intelligence centers, rockets, and missiles. News of the attacks coming just hours after the somber return to the U.S. of the remains of 3 fallen soldiers. In a statement tonight, President Biden saying the American response will continue at times and places of our choosing, and warning if you harm an American, we will respond. It's where we begin tonight with Peter Alexander.
Tonight, the American retaliatory strikes have begun. U.S. Central Command saying late this evening, U.S. forces began striking more than 85 targets in Iraq and Syria, using numerous aircraft, including long-range bombers flown from the U.S. The targets, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Quds Force and affiliated militia groups, hitting their command and control operations centers and intelligence centers, rockets and missiles, and unmanned aired vehicle storage, among other sites. President Biden tonight saying our response began today. It will continue in times and places of our choosing. Let all those who might seek to do us harm know this. If you harm an American, we will respond. The U.S. strikes come in response to that deadly drone attack by Iranian-backed militias that struck Tower 22, a desert outpost in Jordan, killing 3 U.S. service members. That attack, among more than 160 against American Iranian-backed militias since October.
Sorry about that.
President Biden had previously authorized limited strikes in response that even he acknowledged had not deterred the militias. And the president has been under pressure to respond more forcefully, especially after American service members were killed. All of it just hours after the commander-in-chief performed one of his most solemn duties, attending the dignified transfer at Dover Air Force Base as the remains of those 3 U.S. service members returned home.
Having trouble, I'm sorry.
The Lady joining the grieving families of 46-year-old Sergeant William Rivers, a soldier's soldier, his cousin said, 24-year-old Sergeant Kennedy Sanders, whose family said she was always full of life, and 23-year-old Sergeant Brianna Moffett, her parents remembering how she could light up a room. The U.S. today also launching preemptive strikes on the Iranian-backed Houthis. NBC's Courtney Kuby is in the region tonight.
I'm here on the USS Eisenhower in the Red Sea, where just a couple hours ago, nearly a dozen F-A-18 fighter jets took off from the deck of this aircraft carrier. Their mission, to stop multiple incoming drones fired by Houthi rebels in Yemen. They were supported by EA-18 Growlers, protecting the fighter jets from Houthi air defenses. Now, defense officials stress that these actions tonight were not part of the larger retaliatory actions that the U.S. has been talking about all week.
Thanks to Courtney Kuby in the region tonight. And Peter, you've got reporting on what was hit in these attacks.
Lester, that's right. 2 U.S. officials tell NBC News tonight that at least half a dozen facilities were struck and that those sites were linked directly to attacks against the U.S. and coalition forces in the region. Tonight, as we said, President Biden putting out a statement saying, among other things, that he does not seek a wider war in the Middle East or anywhere else in the world. Lester?
Peter Alexander, thanks. I'm joined now by Admiral James Stavridis, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander. Admiral, you've heard the list of weaponry and some of the aircraft involved. What does that tell you about the nature of this response?
3 things. One, Lester, this is going to be a long campaign. We're going to bring in all kinds of assets from the long-range bombers, drones, aircraft operating off ships. Number 2, this is clearly a signal to Iran that we are willing to fully commit in this campaign. And number 3, we are serious. It is time for Iran to back down.
Admiral James Stavridis, thank you. In a Michigan courtroom today, closing arguments in the involuntary manslaughter trial of Jennifer Crumbley, the mother of a teenager who shot and killed 4 students at Oxford High School. Maggie Vespa now with late details.
Tonight, Jennifer Crumbley's fate will soon be in the hands of a jury after closing arguments in her involuntary manslaughter trial honed in on whether the 45-year-old Michigan mom broke the law by failing to stop her son from killing 4 classmates at Oxford High School.
The shooter learned how to shoot and was given the murder weapon by his parents.
No one could have expected this, including Mrs. Crumbley.
Prosecutors suggesting Crumbley ignored red flags.
He was struggling. He was hallucinating. He was seeing things. She did not give him the help that he wanted.
And so
The defense hitting back.
Trained professionals told Mrs. Crumbly her son was not a risk.
9 days of testimony culminating with Crumbly, the defense's only witness. She was cross-examined by prosecutors today.
And you don't deny that you never once took him to see a therapist or counselor?
No, I did not.
Prosecutors also pushing back on Crumbly's earlier testimony that her husband, James, who's set to be tried in March, was responsible for securing Ethan's gun.
Well, you didn't trust him to get out of bed on time.
Correct.
But this is the person you entrusted with a deadly weapon.
I did.
The defense making one final plea.
I am asking that you find Jennifer Crumbly not guilty, not just for Jennifer Crumbly, but for every mother who's out there doing the best they can, who could easily be in her shoes.
Jury deliberations begin Monday on a landmark question. At what point is a parent legally required to stop their child from carrying out a mass shooting? Lester?
All right, Maggie, thanks. In Washington, the judge in the federal election interference case against former President Trump formally postponed the start of his trial, scheduled to begin next month. While in Georgia, Fulton County DA Fani Willis addressed allegations that have threatened to derail the Georgia election case against Mr. Trump. Here's Blaine Alexander.
Tonight, a defiant District Attorney Fani Willis is breaking her silence. In a 176-page filing, she acknowledges a personal relationship with Nathan Wade, the special prosecutor she appointed to lead the Georgia election case against former President Donald Trump. But Willis denies any financial benefit or conflict of interest, writing, while the allegations are salacious and garnered the media attention they were designed to obtain, they do not provide any basis for her to be removed from the case. That's what Trump co-defendant Michael Roman has asked for, accusing Willis of financially benefiting from a romantic relationship, saying Wade used money he earned from the DA's office to pay for vacations together. But in her response, Willis today provided her own receipts, saying travel was evenly split between the two, and arguing Wade made more money than the other special prosecutors only because he did much more work. The filing included a sworn affidavit from Wade, who said while the two were professional associates and friends when he was hired on the case, they later developed a personal relationship. But in a response of his own, Michael Roman says he has witnesses who will testify the relationship actually began before Wade's hiring. All of it has brought intense scrutiny to the closely watched case against Donald Trump and to Willis herself. Mr. Trump has also sought to have the charges dismissed, and today posting, "This scam is totally discredited and over." It all comes amid new pressure from Congress, where Republican Congressman Jim Jordan has subpoenaed Willis, seeking documents to determine whether she misused federal money. And back in Georgia, Willis and Wade have been subpoenaed to testify on these allegations in 2 weeks, but Willis wants a judge to cancel that hearing and vows to fight the subpoena, calling it an attempt to embarrass and harass her personally. Lester?
All right, Blaine, thank you. In Clearwater, Florida, investigators are trying to find out why a single-engine plane lost power and crashed into a mobile home community, causing a big fire and killing 3 people, including the pilot. Shortly before the crash, the pilot called for help, saying that he was losing the engine. And we're keeping a close eye on the weather tonight in California, where yet another atmospheric river is expected to bring very heavy rain over the weekend and into next week. This on top of so much rain and flooding we've seen this week. New flood watches are already in effect tonight. Another surprising strong jobs report tonight. The economy adding 353,000 jobs in January, almost double expectations. Unemployment remained at 3.7%. That should be good news for President Biden, who is expected to coast to victory in tomorrow's Democratic primary in South Carolina. But as Gabe Gutierrez reports, there may be signs of trouble for November.
We're going to go on right here. I don't know what all this is about pertaining to politics. I'm not into politics. I'm into realization towards what's actually occurring right now, presently in people's lives. As far as I'm concerned, both sides has miraculously done such of a bad job in putting us where we are right now. It just is, to me, it's absolutely sickening in thinking that anybody's going to revote somebody that actually allowed or put us where we are today pertaining to all the troubles. Getting back on the war situation, I told you about 2 or 3 days ago that this was coming to prepare for war, because they just kept continuously battering us and battering us and battering us. And, you know, there comes a point to where nobody is nobody's fool pertaining to somebody provoking America like that, thinking that we're going to sit idly by and just not do nothing. As far as I'm concerned, the devil and the devil's people over there in the Middle East are getting just exactly what they deserve. And as far as I'm concerned, it could have been avoided. Obviously, it wasn't avoided. So now we're dealing with the aftermath towards what other people didn't do that they should have done, but now is putting everybody at risk.
It's down with Speaker of the House Mike Johnson to discuss the border deal and looming vote to impeach Secretary Mayorkas, plus the fight over funding for the wars in Ukraine and the Mideast. Sunday on Meet the Press.
All right, let's go forward here.
Survivor of an accidental shooting.
Let's go forward some more. I done seen some of this. Man, that guy right there, he
franchise,
he
the most
passed
successful
away.
sports movies ever made.
I hate it that he's no longer with us.
Weathers died in his sleep Thursday at the age of 76, his family said, adding, Carl was an exceptional human being who lived an extraordinary life. He has left an indelible mark. His acting career began after briefly playing linebacker in the NFL. Weathers, it turned out, was a much better actor than football player.
Dylan!
In 1987, he had a role in Predator,
You son of a...
matching biceps with Arnold Schwarzenegger. The consummate tough guy and action hero, aware there weren't many actors like him in the 80s.
You know, there's a void in terms of action films that star guys who have skin this color. There's a void in that.
But it wasn't just action movies. Weathers turned to comedy in Happy Gilmore, a one-handed golf pro with quite a story.
Damn alligator bit my hand off.
Oh my God!
You come here.
Weathers' final role was in the Star Wars TV series The Mandalorian, a 5-decade-long career that started when he tossed his hat into the ring. Stephanie Gosk, NBC News.
That's Nightly News. Join Meet the Press Sunday on NBC when Kristen Welker...
We done seen that. Yep, he was a good entertainer. He was a good actor.
Rid of early voting to keep Election Day special.
We'll get to what local voters and clerks are saying about that bill in a moment. But first, 2 other proposed bills involving drag shows are stirring up controversy.
Both limit where they can be located. Today, reaction is House Bill 402 and Senate Bill 147 describe those businesses as adult book and video stores and others that host drag shows. The bills describe drag shows as performances where a person or group sings, lip syncs, dances, or performs before an audience while appearing as a person of the opposite sex through the use of exaggerated makeup, clothing, or other physical markers. Local 6's Ariana Allen joins us. Ariana, where can't these businesses set up shop?
Todd, within 933 feet of places of worship, childcare facilities, children's amusement establishments, buildings with an educational occupancy, parks, recreational areas, and facilities. At least one Paducah business that hosts drag shows tells me the bill is unclear. What is, that they'll be impacted by it. An empty stage today. But Paducah Beer Works owner Todd Bloom says in just a week, they'll host another drag show here.
Been having drag shows for at least 3 to 4 years now.
Identical House and Senate bills proposed now aim to restrict where drag artists can perform. Earlier this week, one of those bills sponsored said this boiled down to protecting children.
And it is our responsibility as adults to protect the innocence of their minds and bodies.
To that, Bloom says this.
And they say they want to protect the children. Well, I believe Jon Stewart said it best. What's the #1 cause of childhood death? And I'll tell you, it's not drag shows. It's guns. If they really want to protect the kids, there's many other things that they can go out. They can look at health care. They can look at gun control. There's other things they can do.
Bloom says if this bill becomes law, they would lose drag shows.
It also says you can't have a performance within 900 feet of a church. We have a church 2 houses down. So that would preclude us from having any shows any longer.
Tara Markham sits on the Paducah Pride Fest committee. She remembers when the Senate tried to pass a similar bill last year,
which kind of led our community to kind of be in a state of panic, trying to, figure out the unknown and what our events were going to look like.
She says it's crucial that everyone reads this bill closely.
Read directly the KRS, read directly from the bills, which both are very elusive.
In Paducah, Ariana Allen, WPSD, Local 6.
Neither bill in the House or Senate have made it out of committee. Last year, the Kentucky Senate attempted to pass a similar bill. It got stuck in committee. Tonight, as we mentioned, voters are reacting to the possibility of losing the ability to vote early in Kentucky. That's if Senate Bill 61 is passed.
Last night, Secretary of State Michael Adams told us the potential ramifications of eliminating early voting. He warns it can make it hard for Kentucky to attract businesses because it would hurt the state's image. Senate Bill 61 was introduced in the Senate January 4th. The bill has yet to make it out of the state and local government committee, and Adams told us last night he's hopeful it won't. Local 6's Jeremiah Hatcher talked to voters today.
A lot of controversy. If it ain't controversy on one thing, it's controversy on another, which is only the Bible fulfilling itself. For in the last days there will be rumors of wars and commotions and threats and problems like people never could ever begin to believe. Now look at this. Now look at this for a second.
We're already down to the 40s there this hour. As the cooler air has kind of split that area in half to the...
Less than a month ago, probably more like 3 weeks ago, we was having temperatures at night that was dropping down either to 0 or past 0. And now these are nightly figures.
Still close to 60 degrees in Murray, as well as Paris, Tennessee, and Hopkinsville. And that warmth is going to be building in as we head through the next couple of days. The rest of this evening, pretty pleasant. If you're headed out and about, look for partly cloudy to mostly clear skies through the overnight.
So where's the heat coming from? It just all of a sudden just starts warming up. We get cold dramatically, and then all of a sudden we get hot dramatically, back and forth, swaying back and forth. I think it's coming from the earth. I think the heat is literally coming from the earth and the upper loft pertaining to it being damaged, and we're damaging the planet by draining all the oil resources out of the ground. And because of it, it's made everything unstable because, like I said, well, let me put it this way. I had an operation scheduled for whenever all this stuff first set in, pertaining to it getting severely, severely cold. Because of inclement weather, ice and snow, whatever, we had to cancel it and postpone it. Well, we had to postpone it again because of inclement weather. We had to move it up another week of my operation. The week of my operation was whenever it finally got out of the clinchings of the cold, and then everything started thawing and basically made my yard back here, as far as my driveway, basically turn into nothing but mush. Going from one extreme to another that is uncharacteristic of the way that it used to be 40, 50, 60 years ago. So these climate deniers that has based their identity off of one particular event towards how cold it gets, how quick it gets cold, you can blow that out the door. You can blow all that out the door because it's the irregularities is what people need to look at more so than either the extreme cold or the extreme hot. But I mean, we have to look at all of it. But the weather itself, Mother Nature is performing and acting very, very abnormal. And we've seen it changing little by little by little, and it keeps changing even more, becoming more dramatic, more drastic as we go along. These are all part of the sorrows that the Bible talks about in the Bible in end time final major events that's going to occur, that even as we shall see the days approaching, that no flesh shall be saved, but for the elect's sake, God's chosen people, those days would in fact be shortened. Like I said a while ago, pertaining to the war situation over in the Middle East, now we've reached a plateau that we're dealing with a new entity, a different entity than what we should have been dealing with pertaining to a major revival that should have broke out in the late 80s, early 90s. But because of the Juby deniers, the Windmill Ministries deniers, because of those that wasn't willing to accept the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, in interpretations out of the Bible, out of the King James Version Bible, it has put us where we are today. It has basically been the failure of not just the American politicians, but worldwide global politicians that has now struck in with a vengeance, beginning with COVID, going from the Ukraine war to all the gas companies rising their prices and basically taking advantage of the public, to what went on over in Israel pertaining to that attack. And now we're seeing, I think, over 150 attacks on our American soldiers. So in reality, Satan and Satan's people are going to get just exactly what they've been wanting to get. They've been wanting to get a dose of whip ass, so that's what they're going to get. Like I said earlier on about another video or two of mine, those people are basically suicidal. They're living on top of one another. They refuse to compromise. For the most part, they're antichrist. And this is the results of what Jesus said, that it would have been better for Sodom and Gomorrah than for that group of people that would not accept him. That you can look at the history ever since Christ was crucified and rose on the third day, resurrected. Over in that area has been nothing but total chaos since that glorious day that Christ rose from the tomb.
Overnight hours will only drop into the mid-40s. We do have some rain chances on the way for part of the weekend. We'll prepare you for that hour by hour in just a few minutes.
The normal day at work. When, I never would have.
This guy shot somebody accidentally. This is local news. This is our local news here in this area, WPSD.
Little four-toed hedgehog Ibu thinks of her shadow.
Yes.
Look at her.
Well, she didn't seem to be scared of it, so it looks like she's predicting an early spring as well.
All right.
However, she did tip over her house at the end, so
Cranky.
a little cranky. Not too sure what that means weather-wise. Meteorologist Jennifer Rukavina joins us now.
Okay, so Jen.
All right, let's go to this. Back to national news.
Force over and over again here. Let me follow up and ask about diplomatic channels with Iran. Obviously, there's a number of interesting diplomatic channels that have developed recently. There's a Qatari channel through which U.S. Negotiators, including the director of CIA, William Burns, has been involved in negotiations with the Israelis and Hamas representatives through the Qataris for some kind of exchange of cessation of hostilities for mass release of hostages in Gaza. There is no real Iran channel of diplomacy active right now. There was one that tried to revive that nuclear deal the Trump administration ripped up. There's some channel through the Qataris, but do you think that's something that's needed, lacking?
Well, I'm almost always a proponent of establishing some method of communication to avoid misunderstanding, because when you have very large and capable militaries that have significant capabilities that are operating in close proximity to one another, a very easy way for this to go awry is for actions to be misunderstood. And that's why making sure that the retaliatory strikes that the administration took today were carefully calibrated, were strategic, and were surgical, because the misunderstanding is exactly how this turns into a larger Middle East conflict with very large militaries fighting each other directly. And when you have, not a few soldiers being killed, which is a terrible tragedy in and of itself, we have, very large numbers of soldiers meeting themselves on the battlefield, which is what we want to avoid at all costs here, if we can.
Let me ask you this, a slightly political question, or a question about your constituents in your district. How top of mind is this for the folks that you represent in the 3rd District in Colorado?
Well, it's very top of mind. I have the honor of representing one of the most diverse congressional districts in the nation. And 20% of my constituents were born outside of the United States. I have 130 languages spoken in my community. I have a large Jewish community. I have a large Arab community. I have a Palestinian diaspora. So I've been engaging with these folks weekly over the last couple of months. I engage with them all the time the last couple of years, but I've been doing extra the last few months to make sure that I'm listening to them, I'm hearing their concerns, and we figure out how we can address this, because it's their lived experience that informs my work. They have families and loved ones who are in harm's way, whether it be in Israel or in Gaza. I held a roundtable a couple of months ago with Palestinian members of my community, and one gentleman told me that he lost 50 members of his family in the last couple of months. 50 members, that's one family. It's truly heartbreaking. So that informs my work to make sure that we are putting humanity first. We're putting the protection of civilians first. I'm a former Army Ranger. I served 3 combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. And what I learned in that time is that the protection of civilians in conflict zones, it is a mission essential priority. It's not secondary. It's not a distraction. You can achieve no mission, and you can make nobody safer unless civilians are protected, and that is a priority. And I've done a lot of work over the last couple of years to further that goal.
Congressman Jason Crow of the 6th District, not the 3rd, I misspoke. 3rd is Boebert, 6th District of Colorado. Thank you very much, Congressman. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
We've got much more on tonight's strikes in Iraq and Syria, but first, there's also big news on the trials of Donald Trump and the timeline of it.
All right, let's go up here to CNN right here, see what they're doing, see what they're talking about.
Region, and you had an adversary publicly discussing operations in advance, saying we're going to strike and we're going to strike hard, and you know how they've struck in the past. The U.S. has struck Iran-backed militias in Syria and Iraq prior. What would you have done in advance?
First of all, I'd say thank you for the heads up. And secondarily, as described, I'd get key personnel into safety, move them as far away as I could into locations where they haven't been before. In other words, it would have to be a new target. And if I had the capacity and I had the time, I'd remove kit that I thought was necessary so that I could continue to maintain a capability.
Understood. General Clark, when you look at the broader effects of U.S. deterrence in the region, in terms of not just attacks on U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria, but also Houthi attacks on shipping in the Red Sea, also Hezbollah attacks on northern Israel. What is the state of U.S. deterrence in terms of keeping this conflict from expanding further, or in fact, putting a lid on some of these things we've been seeing?
Well, it's not clear that we're doing enough to put a lid on it, Jim. You've got to go after assets that Iran values. I think Iran will fight to the last militiaman, recruit some more fools to go out there and do stupid things and get killed. They've got a pretty robust military industry. They can put more equipment, more ammunition there. This is more of the same from the administration, a little bit heavier. It's not exactly tit for tat, but it's certainly not a sort of, this is it, no more, enough is enough. It's just not that.
Not a strategic putting the foot down, as it were. Colonel Mansour, Defense Secretary Lord Austin did say in a statement that these strikes today are, quote, the start of our response, end quote. Can the U.S. over time deliver what it may not have delivered in one strike tonight. In other words, through repeated, sustained attacks, not just take out capabilities and degrade capabilities, but also deter further attacks going forward?
Well, it will have to be done over time. That's the only way you can track personnel, key personnel, and especially tracking IRGC, Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, Quds Force operatives. The two times that I recall that we have deterred Iran, in both times we captured or killed Iranian operatives. The first one was during the surge in 2007-2008 when we captured several of their operatives, and the second time is when we killed Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Quds Force. And in both cases, the Iranians backed off for a time. And so this will have to be done as they come out of their hiding places, or if Iran moves these people back into the field after having pulled them back to Iran to escape U.S. retaliation.
Well, we'll continue to watch, of course, and possible events over the course of the weekend even. General Clark, Major General Spider Marks, Colonel Mansour, thanks so much to all three of you. And still to come this hour, the dignified return of the 3 U.S. service members whose killing prompted tonight's ongoing retaliatory strikes, and a conversation with former Defense Secretary Mark Esper.
Looks like things are going to go in the way that we are being entrapped towards.
Okay. The paperwork for the truck is in the...
It's either that or let them bully us and take advantage of it.
Party for free and get a 45 million coin bonus. Check.
This harms us. It harms us when all of the focus goes to these more privileged spaces. It harms us when people...
And Subpart F uses that familiar mechanism.
A segment of the administration is bucking decades of U.S. Middle East policy, considering a unilateral recognition of Palestinian statehood. Israel did not sign off on this. They're calling it the Biden Doctrine. The president and the State Department say the U.S. doesn't want a wider war with Iran, Eric, but earlier this week, Iran said it would respond decisively to any U.S. attack on Iran, and so we'll have to see, will the same be said for Iranian proxies? We've been launching attack after attack after attack on both Israeli and American targets. Eric, back to you.
Dan Cohen, thank you very much. All right, folks, United States forces striking more than 85 targets in Syria and Iraq. Multiple aircrafts were used, including long-range bombers flown from U.S. soil. And the White House warns that today's strikes are just the beginning. Let's bring in Georgia Congressman Rich McCormick, who sits on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman, really good to have you. You weren't given any warning of this, were you? And by the way, do you have any intel as to when the next wave of attacks, of retaliatory attacks, will happen?
I think we're all given warnings. As a matter of fact, we got way too much warning. We're announcing that we're going to hit these targets, that we're going to hit multiple targets. We gave them time to evacuate. We've seen intelligence that's not even classified of people evacuating these places that we knew we'd attack. That's absolutely the wrong tactics, the wrong strategy. The fact that we waited years now, while we've been attacked since, I think 2020 is when this really began. We've had hundreds of attacks just since October on multiple targets that are U.S. troops. We know where the munitions are produced. We know where they're distributed from. We know who's backing them. We haven't done a dang thing. As a matter of fact, we have allowed them access to billions of dollars to fund this proxy war against us, not just in Israel, not just in Gaza, not just in Palestine, not just in Ukraine, but all over the world, including Africa and other places. This is a bad regime that should be punished financially, economically, strategically. All options should be on the table. We should not allow them to process weapons against us without serious ramifications.
Congressman, talk to us a little bit about this IRI, the Islamic Resistance in Iraq. It seems to be some sort of umbrella corporation, for lack of a better word, for all these splinter groups who just want to be kind of cohesive. Meanwhile, these are all funded by Iran. So what is this IRI?
So IRI, just you can call it doesn't matter if you're talking about Hamas or Hezbollah or the Houthis in Yemen. It doesn't matter if you're talking about Al Qaeda or ISIS. Any group that supports violence against the United States has to be gone after specifically. Now the problem is we have a lot of targets. But you remember when we went after Qasem Soleimani, there was no warning. When we went after Muammar Gaddafi, there was no warning. We just pulled the trigger, we destroyed bad guys, and they keep their head down and they stay out of our way. Now, we're going to see very quickly whether this has been an effective attack at all. But if the attacks on U.S. troops are not ceased immediately, it wasn't. And quite frankly, I think we need to step it up. Anytime, and it shouldn't be something that's commensurate. It should be absolutely escalated. When we go to warfighting school, when we learn how to execute warfare, the Clausewitzian life school, when you talk about on war, you come at them with everything you have and the bad things stop.
Let me tell you, we agree with you so much. If you're going to do it, you might as well do it. This whole idea of proportionality is nonsense. Look what Israel is showing Hamas. There's no proportionality by Israel against Hamas. They're saying, we're going to get rid of you. None of this garbage of, you took 1,200 of ours, we'll take 1,200 of yours. We're going to finish you off so you don't do it again. Congressman Rich McCormick, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Semper Fi.
All right, folks, coming up, the U.S. targets Iran's IRGC and Iran proxy militias. Joe Biden says the response will continue at times and places of our choosing. But what will exactly that mean? We're talking to Special Military Intelligence next.
Basically, what it means is things has taken on a whole new level of seriousness. Basically, what it means is the Americans here in the United States are at a higher risk towards seeing a retaliation.
This country was made by tax rebels, freedom fighters. Inflation.
Let's go back just for a second. Let's go all the way back.
Last segment of the administration is bucking decades of U.S. Middle East policy, considering a unilateral recognition of Palestinian statehood. Israel did not sign off on this. They're calling it the Biden Doctrine. The president and the State Department say the U.S. doesn't want a wider war with Iran. Eric, but earlier this week, Iran said it would respond decisively to any U.S. attack on Iran, and so we'll have to see, will the same be said for Iranian proxies?
To protest, that
Pretty available in
always.
To improve your protection against them, just turn on.
To include attacks, for example, on Iranian naval vessels or oil platforms, or attacking inside the country until Iran stopped its bad behavior, until it stopped attacks on U.S. forces and bases.
Now, you know better than me that when you present the president with those options, you make your best assessment as to what a likely Iranian response would be. And to your point, successive presidents have made the calculation you can strike Iranian forces outside of Iran, inside Iran, even President Trump, a bridge too far. But in terms of what we saw tonight, we don't know if or how many Iranian personnel, Quds Force fighters, were killed in these strikes. What would be the menu of potential retaliatory strikes from Iran that the U.S. would at least be preparing for?
Well, first of all, you're spot on. We don't know exactly what the battle damage assessment is. We won't know till the morning. We will be able to see the damage on the ground. Your photos show, some results of the attacks tonight, secondary explosions. But what we don't know is did we kill the people we wanted to kill, the IRGC Quds Force commanders that were maybe there? Of course, Iran had a few days to not just move its people, but maybe to move sensitive equipment as well. So I would hope that we would pursue those things and continue the campaign beyond just a day or two. And of course, the Pentagon and the White House have said as much. With regard to the Iranian responses, look, it could be, of course, localized attacks again against United States bases through their proxies. It could be missile attacks, as we saw during my tenure in early 2020. I think that's less likely, but you don't know. You have to be prepared for all that. I think that might also explain why there was some of the delay. You want to give your forces in the region, particularly in partner states like the UAE, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, the chance to prepare and defend themselves, maybe relocate our own assets as well.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's not just preparation for the other side, giving them time, but give your own people time to prioritize force protection. Before we go, decisions to use military force are, of course, some of the most difficult for sitting presidents, and this is, of course, taking place in an election year. A major test for this president?
Absolutely a major test. Look, I think you'll look at some milestones in the president's foreign policy. One would be the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which was poorly handled and, of course, resulted in a dozen or so brave Americans. You had the Russian invasion of Ukraine, would be another. October 17th, the brutal attack by Hamas on Israel, and now another milestone in U.S.-Iranian relations. And look, depending on what happens tonight and in the coming days, how Iran responds, how the president responds again, this is also going to have a political impact here back home with an election 10 months away. People are going to look at this and make another judgment, another assessment about President Biden at a time when he's getting heat from all Americans with regard to the economy. There's dissatisfaction with regard to how he's handling the border. And now the question will be foreign policy once again, is how do Americans size him up and how do they compare him against his likely competitor, Donald Trump?
Former Defense Secretary Mark Esper, thanks so much for joining.
Thanks, Jim.
A closer look at the short and longer term implications of these strikes. A former top intelligence official will join us to help answer those questions. That's coming up.
Let's go back here real quick. Past it. Right there.
So we have a strike. We understand 85 areas were hit within 7 major areas within Syria and Iraq. What's the next level? What should be the next wave of attacks?
Well, you're a ball player. This is just the first inning. So in the first strike, we take out command, control, communications. We take out any kind of warehouses and their capability of striking. After that, we can start going for the squirters, the people that manage to escape those first strikes, see where their safe houses are, start taking out those operations. And now with the intel that we gathered from the 5 days it took for us to move our bombers and get our tankers into position, now we can start going after the houses that we knew they would go to once these strikes occurred. So this is going to be a multi-day process. It could take a couple of weeks, and the Air Force, I am so impressed with their capabilities and the multi-capable airmen that are making this mission happen. That's what we're going to see in the next few weeks.
Let's be very, very clear here, folks. I'm not suggesting that our military is incapable. I'm suggesting that the people who are calling the shots in Washington are unwilling to deploy our military the way they should. Mike Sarraille, let me ask you this. The IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, what are they? They're sitting back watching and just, holding their arms, folding their arms and watching. What do you think they're up to?
Well, this is understood. This is war by proxy, and Iran has pretty much written the playbook at this point. These groups know they're on their own. They know that Iran, unless we do an incursion into Iranian airspace or their sovereignty, won't come to their aid. So it's not a surprise to a lot of us that have served over there that understand this playbook. And Iran's going to continue to utilize their proxy force. Even if we eliminate one proxy force, they'll have another that they can fund and put into action within weeks or months.
Yep, whack-a-mole. The old whack-a-mole. This all started, remember, ISIS, the whack-a-mole ISIS thing under Obama. Ryan McBeth, Mike Sarraille, thank you both for joining us.
Didn't begin with Obama.
Folks, coming up, we know that
it was all the way back to Carter.
Very close, within weeks, to having a nuclear warhead, according to the IAEA. How concerned should we be after today's attacks? Army Lieutenant Daniel Davis gives us more next.
We are off. Falls. Can you talk about that and talk about how the
Tonight, thanks. Human Majd is an NBC News contributor who's reported on Iran extensively. He's authored several books, including The Ayatollah's Democracy and Iranian Challenge. Erin Banco, a national security reporter at Politico, her latest piece is on how U.S. intelligence officials estimate Tehran does not have full control of the proxy groups that have been firing on U.S. soldiers. And Robin Wright is a contributing writer and columnist in New Yorker who's covered Iran, the Middle East for decades. Her latest article discusses how 10 Middle East conflicts are converging into one big war. They all join me now. Robin, let me just start with you and just set some context here, because I know this is sort of an important part of this context. We talk about Iranian proxy groups, Iranian influence throughout the region. And you've spent time with these groups and with Americans in these groups, this is all sort of aftermath of the Iraq War, right? Iraq and Iran are mortal enemies. They fight one of the bloodiest wars of the last 50 years. Of course, the U.S. comes in. We get rid of Saddam Hussein, regime change. This creates a power vacuum, and the Shia majority in Iraq rises to power in that government. The Arab Spring and the subsequent Syrian civil wars produced this kind of huge parts of the region that are essentially, as Keir Simmons was saying, sort of outside of the reach of central governments. On the ground, what does it look like in these areas where precisely these groups are operating?
Well, it's not just since the Iraq invasion. It's really going back 40 years since the birth of Hezbollah in Lebanon, which in 1982 carried out a military strike, the largest loss of U.S. military life in a single incident since Iwo Jima in World War II. So one of the problems is the United States is playing the short game and Iran is playing the long game. We're 250 years old and it's 2,500 years old. It's willing to invest in the long term to get the United States to lead the entire region. And it has empowered these groups, some of which operate in terms of their own agenda, even as they share that strategic goal of getting the Americans out. But today it looks like the Americans have responded extensively with 85 strikes. But the reality is the Iranian militias have been doing this for a very long time at great cost to American life, to American allies. And the question of the day is who's stronger in the region, America and its allies or Iran and its allies? And I think that's unclear.
There was, Matt was talking about this briefly, the defining axis of the region until fairly recently was this sort of Sunni Shia, Saudi Arabia-Iran conflict. And it's sort of getting worse and worse. And you saw Yemen as the sort of site of it between the different proxies they were fighting. There was somewhat remarkably a kind of Chinese-struck deal between the two that really did lower the tensions between those two. And it was that axis of conflict that Matt was recognizing that was sort of creating a lot of these new alliances, the ideas of the Gulf states recognizing Israel, right? Like we have a shared enemy in Iran, and Iran incursion and encroachment. How does the last several months change all of that?
Well, interestingly, the Chinese brokered deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia resulted in ambassadors being exchanged, embassies being opened, and much more cordial relations.
Yeah, a real restoration.
Yeah, restoration of ties. Yeah, absolutely. I think both Saudi Arabia and Iran recognize it's in their interest to have relations. They're always going to be at odds. Competitors, yeah. The two most powerful nations outside of Israel in the Middle East. But I think that, the last few months have obviously shown that Iran's power and influence is much greater than what most Americans would have thought before. Hamas is not controlled by Iran, obviously. It funds much of its budget, or some of its budget. A lot of the rest of its budget comes from Qatar, and certainly gives weapons and arms to Hamas, and is generally very supportive of Hamas. Wasn't always that way during the Syrian war. They were on opposite sides. And they're Sunni and Iran's Shia. So it's a very complicated situation with Hamas, much less complicated with Hezbollah, which are directly really controlled by Iran. They are part of the Islamic Republic in many ways.
And Robin, you made this point that I want to come back to, just about the killing of American Marines in the barracks in Lebanon in '83, which was a sort of horrible tragedy conclusion of that 82 war, which there's a lot of sort of interesting historical resonances, I think, now. And I want to get to your great reporting, Aaron Benko-Human, Aaron Robin. Stay with me. We have much more to talk about after this quick break.
Is ergonomically designed.
Que en aquel momento tenía 73.
How does this stop? Let's put it that way, Colonel.
Yeah, that's the exact question that should be asked, and I don't hear many people today asking that question. They don't want to talk about how hard we should hit and should we go into Iran proper and all that. But that's the question I have with the administration. What is the strategy here? What is your objective? What are you trying to accomplish? Because when you use lethal military power, it must have some sort of purpose so that it will attain some outcome good to America. Right now, all I see is us hitting a bunch of targets in the area. They haven't moved any of our troops to safety to get them out of these vulnerable places like the one at Tower 22. But we have struck against people who say they're going to strike back. And everything we've done against the Houthis in the Red Sea and all the strikes that preceded this up from October 17th have shown you that they'll continue to retaliate. So the question's going to be, what do you do if it doesn't deter Iran or these back groups and they keep hitting and killing Americans? Now then you have to escalate even higher, and you see it's not too many rungs up that ladder, and you potentially could be in a war.
Colonel, what should we not do?
What we should not do is take the easy, emotionally satisfying move of striking directly into Iran. It doesn't look like we have now, and I hope we don't do that. What we need to do is to kill the people that attacked American troops. That's non-negotiable. That needs to happen. Whether it's Kataib Hezbollah or whether it's the Islamic Resistance Group in Iraq, whoever it was, they need to be taken out. And we need to do that based on intelligence. Then we need to get the rest of those troops out of these vulnerable locations and move them elsewhere in the Middle East where we have better security, we have better air defense positions that can defend against those kinds of, whether it's drones or Iranian ballistic missiles that may come later. That's what we need to do. So we move away from our vulnerability.
Colonel, as we speak, you know what the perfect positioning for whatever we were trying to do and see in intel gather in the Middle East? Afghanistan.
Yeah, I've made that analogy myself here lately, because when you don't have a strategy and all you do is just use a bunch of military power, but you don't know what you're trying to accomplish with it, then all you do is kill a lot of people. You create new enemies because they don't back down, they don't give up. You get more Americans killed, and in the end, what do you have? You have an open-ended conflict and lots of casualties.
Yep, and that's, whoever, wants to jump in and pick sides, and it escalates, and that's something no one really wants. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, thank you so much for joining us. That's true. That's true. Well, thank you for qualifying that. No one in America wants that. All right, folks, coming up, Joe Biden issued a statement, but when will he actually speak to the American people?
To both of you.
His team says, Smith's team, there's no evidence Trump even had a security clearance after he left office, despite the attorney's claim. What does that?
Radicalizing your children, you're either highly misguided or unwilling to accept reality. It's right in front of us. Now, of course, it is even worse at the collegiate level, where on so many levels they value equity over performance every single time. Take Western Oregon University, for example, where failing grades are now banned. Grades D and F will be replaced with NC, or no credit, to discourage students from dropping out. And it's going to have no effect on a student's GPA whatsoever. Just keep trying. Now, typically, when you don't study, you don't do homework, or you don't show up to class, you fail. That's real life. In real life, there are repercussions for our actions. But the left doesn't like that, of course. They prefer victimhood, especially in the vaunted Ivy League.
Father Richard John Newhouse, the great Catholic thinker, has a line that socialism is the religion you get when you get rid of religion. Because people do want to believe in something that's bigger than themselves, and socialism gives you all of the guilt and none of the grace. Unfortunately, a whole generation has been educated in a way that frankly sees victimhood and oppression as being a tool to manipulate the young.
Hoover Institute fellow Victor Davis Hanson joins us now. By the way, that clip we just played is from Poison Ivy. It's on Fox Nation talking about how the Ivy Leagues have been completely corrupted. And Victor, thank you for being a part of that special. You can catch it Sunday at 10 p.m. Victor, let me put this question to you, because you've thought about these things. Is higher education or K through 12 more dangerous at this point when it comes to the minds of our kids?
Well, I think K through 12 is, because it's a larger group of people, and people are much more impressionable at a younger age. And the problem is that for any totalitarian ideology, and that's what cultural Marxism is, it never appeals to 51% of the population, so they always have to indoctrinate at a very early age and prep people into so-called correct way of thinking. And that's the sin of commission. But the other sin of omission is it requires a compliant or ignorant student. And for all that effort we put at DEI, we're leaving out philosophy, history, language, math, science. And so we're creating these arrogant zealots who are actually very ignorant. They don't have the tools, the inductive thinking, the empirical method of inquiry to refute this indoctrination. So we lose both ways by omission and commission. And I think that's why people are fleeing the public schools in droves.
You're right. And that radicalization at younger levels, if you talk to professors, and you talk about this in our special Poison Ivy, exacerbates the radicalism on college campuses, because now it's not just the Marxist professors, it's the woke students who are demanding activism in colleges.
Yeah, that is new, Pete. The idea was before that people who were politically disinterested or neutral came to college, and then they came home the first semester and shocked their parents at all the Marxist tripe that they went through it because they got it from the professors. Now the students are coming into college more radical than the professors, and you hear professors say, well, I'm left-wing, but I cannot believe what the students are demanding of me. This whole idea of segregated spaces, segregated dorms by race, safe spaces, all of that that's a groundswell from the bottom up. And it's pretty disturbing because our national preeminence and competitiveness depends on a better educated population, generally speaking, than our competitors, and that's just simply been forfeited.
Absolutely
It's a tragedy.
right. You're exactly right. By the way, if you want to hear more of Victor Davis Hanson, go deeper into this. How did we get here? Check it out. Poison Ivy on Fox Nation, the entire series right now, or on the Fox News channel Sunday night, 10 p.m. Victor, thank you so much for participating and always being.
I keep telling people how we got here. Whenever the White House decided to take a left-hand turn versus a right, whenever it come to biblical Bible prophecy, they thought that all this was going to be swept under the rug. They thought that wasn't nobody going to be held accountable. They thought that they could get away with it. So what was the next move if I did drown last year? What would have been the next move on a global level if I didn't make it through all these different close encounters of death and scrapes with the law towards basically these entrapments? What would have happened? Is that where the end of the world was already planned out towards a nuclear holocaust? I mean, it's pretty obvious that they didn't want a godly man preaching a godly message pertaining to end time events. So what if they succeeded in basically getting rid of me or causing me to get rid of myself towards me shooting myself in the foot or whatever? What would have been the next best plan? Or would there have been? Or is that where self-annihilation comes in at? You know, it's kind of a scary thought because I know for a fact that I have went up against some very, very strong powers. Not just in Tennessee, but up in Kentucky, Oklahoma, Atlanta, Georgia, California, Phoenix, Arizona, Denver, Colorado. I've went up against some very, very strong powers. And these powers was not full of glory and gleam, but rather they was full of hatred and we're going to bury you. And if we can't bury you one way, we'll bury you another. But yet now, the whole time I've been preaching a message of peace out of the same book that they claim that they believe in, which is the King James. So something doesn't add up whenever you have this much persecution standing up for righteous sake, but yet now they claim that they're Christians, especially right here in the Bible Belt area. So can anybody answer the question pertaining to national security interest? What would the world in general have done if they would have succeeded in destroying me? What would have they done? Or what would have they had not have done? Fortunately, God kept his hand upon me so that I can tell my story little bits at a time. Fortunately, God spared my life, even though I've been wounded, stepped on, bruised, humiliated, discriminated, demonized, and dehumanized for the past 30 plus years and giving out this message. Fortunately, I am in a position of being able to make digitalized videos and being able to express myself pertaining to what actually occurred, when it occurred, who it occurred with, and giving my opinion about why it occurred. It kind of makes you wonder what's around the corner, doesn't it? Especially with everything that's brewing over in the Middle East right now. And I guarantee you, that is only the beginning phases of what is yet to come. Those people have been planning, they have been chartering, they have been praying for the death and destruction of the American people. I guess ever since I've been in existences of the world, probably even longer than that, ever since the Arab Spring, ever since Carter exchanged hostages with Reagan for guns. And it's just been a continuous cycle of problems coming from over that area. And you would think by now, that Israel and Jerusalem would have been successful in creating a revival based around the teachings of the Lord Jesus Christ. But that hadn't happened. And maybe the reason why that it hadn't happened is because you still got a big portion of the sector over there that's still thinking that Jesus Christ was nothing more than just a regular old Joe. You got a certain sector of people over there that are still looking for the Messiah. They're still teaching the Judeo teachings that come from Moses pertaining to an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. In other words, they're teaching formalities. In other words, as long as I go to the priest once a year and I give them a certain portion of my crops, or I give them a certain portion of my money, or if I do this and do that, if I stand up and sit down and recite what the priest is telling me, or the holy man, or the rabbi is telling me to recite, and if I lean back down, if I do the 3 Hail Marys and go before the priest, as long as I pay him the money, everything will be hunky-dory. These are all the things that the Gospels preaches against in regards towards bowing down to idols and bowing down to formalities that does not have nothing to do with a man or a woman actually giving their heart and their life over to Christ. And I think just about any minister, any godly minister here in America that preaches and teaches either out of the King James or somewhere translatable into the King James will agree with me that until that person has truly been saved towards laying everything at the altar, they truly have not been saved. And you hear this again and again and again about people that went to church every time the door was open, and they've done this and they've done that, and they went on this journey overseas toward trying to help and building houses and doing missionary work and stuff. But then finally there towards the late 60s or the 70s, something gets a hold of them. And that something gets a hold of them is called the Holy Spirit. And they finally come clean, and in their coming clean, for the most part, they'll testify that all those years that they was doing what they was doing was in vain, that if they would have died, that they would have more than likely went to a devil's hell because they had never been saved. Formalities is not going to save you. You can go in and out the church door every time it opens, and that don't mean a thing to God. You can stand up, you can recite, you can sit down, you can go to the priest, you can do this, you can do that. These are all avenues of trying to cheat your way into heaven. Basically, you're trying to steal from God. You know why? Because you've never truly given your heart and life over to Him. It's sad. It's sad how the devil has deceived so many people in the beginning phases of the 21st century as we're walking off into who knows what. God bless America. Good luck to all of us. I want to say shalom. I want to pray for the American families of our military. I want to just remember all those over in Jerusalem. I want to remember those over in the Ukraine area. I want to remember all the elderly, the sick, the abused, the used, the ones that are defenseless. Want to stay in constant prayer that God's will be done, and that we will see a eye-opening, revolutionary revival here in America that will not only jar or re-revolutionize the way that the American people think and do, but the world in general pertaining on a global scale. God bless, and heaven help us all. Shalom.